All right, welcome back to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry. I'm your host, Brother Robert Johnson. This is episode 227. This week we're talking with Frater O about the third degree and some of the really cool things that go along with that. But before we get into that interview, I do have to mention the episode sponsor, which is Brothers Blend Coffee. Brothers Blend Coffee, produced by Montgomery Lodge in Milford, Massachusetts, to provide the very finest coffee to the brethren wherever so dispersed. Their friends, families, and colleagues, and it's a fundraiser to support the charitable causes, activities, and maintenance of Montgomery Lodge, right there in Milford. Brothers Blend Coffee is 3 different types of coffee. They have the Tyler's Cup, Harmony Roast, and Adoniram's Brew, and those are listed from, I don't want to say weakest to strongest, but in a flavor spectrum, that's kind of how they are. Adoniram's Brew is a stronger brew. It's really good, but they have all 3 of these. They are excellent coffees, and you can go on and visit www.brothersblendcoffee.com, and it, again, is a good cup of coffee, and we drink a lot of coffee in lodges, so why not grab some of this? It's not any more expensive than some of the premium coffees that you go out and you spend lots of money on. These come already ground. They're good coffee, pre-packaged in 12-ounce packings. It's roasted by Red Barn Coffee Roasters in Hopkinton, Mass. So again, it's still local. Junior wardens and Masonic caterers can get discounts on large orders. My favorite is the Adoniram's Brew, but the Tyler's Cup is really good around evening time when I want a cup of coffee and I don't want something that's going to keep me up all night long, right? So again, please check those out, www.brothersblendcoffee.com. Get yourself some really good coffee, and you're benefiting the craft. So it's for Brothers by Brothers, and it's what we do. It's a charity. So with that, we're going to get right into this week's interview with Frater O about the third degree. Get ready. All right, everybody, this is a special interview. You know, we talked about the first degree and the second degree, and a lot of people were waiting for us to talk about the third degree. The third degree is amazing. It's a brilliant degree, and we'll stop right there and just put a little disclaimer out there that we are not going to reveal anything secret about the third degree. So we're sorry to disappoint, but that's just the way it is, because we're not going to ruin it for any candidates. We're not going to violate any obligations, but there is some things that we can talk about, and they are very interesting regarding legends and symbols, which should be pretty cool. Welcome, Frater O, back on the program.
Thanks for the welcome.
Absolutely. So first thoughts on the third degree in Masonry. What are your just initial thoughts on the third degree in Masonry?
It's an experience that if you go through, there's not a lot of people you can tell. It's one of those, excuse my language, oh shit moments. You're completely blown away by what's been presented. And then you realize once you leave there, you're just like, man, there's only a very few people I can even talk to about this, because most people would be so far-fetched or be over their head, or they would think I'm crazy, or, they might consider me, a lunatic. Not a lunatic, but more like, if you get to a lot of like people that are heavy into religious systems, very unfortunately crazy satanic worship. But it's none of that at all. It's all about introspection and presented in a play that you're the main character in. What about you? What are your thoughts?
Thoughts on the third degree are many. As you said, it's a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I feel like, to me, the third degree, although, there are more degrees out there, and we say that the third degree is the culmination of your Masonic career, and then, of course, you can search out further light within the York and Scottish Rite bodies. But I have to say, out of all the degrees that I've been a part of, the third degree is very special, and it does give you a completion feeling. At the same time, it gives you a feeling of this is the beginning. And it is so interesting the way the degree is done. And again, it's a really beautiful piece of work. It's a piece of art, and it's a piece of living art, because in lodges all across America, this is happening all the time. And it's as if you've seen people who act out paintings. People, they do a live sitting and they replicate a painting like The Last Supper, and they're in motion, and then they freeze. And they freeze in such a way that when you're looking at it, it looks just like the painting. It is art in motion. Art is constantly happening in this play, in which you are the main character, but you don't know your part. So it's a really interesting experience. So, Frater, let me ask you, out of all the things that we learn and that we know that we can talk about amongst brothers, what are some of the deeper levels of things within the third degree that are not officially taught by anybody, making them outside the realm of anything that is banned to talk about? Of course, there's symbolism, and there are things like the pillars of wisdom, strength, and beauty. And so much of this stuff is just in the Bible as an allegory, is where it's pulled from. So it's not secret. What's your take on that?
So like the third degree deals with like a subject that's not capable for simple explanation in like typical words, right? You know, for a lot of people, if they're on the outside looking in, you know, the ritual seems pretty like dark and like super esoteric. It's because like it's the subject matter is not really taken from most other places. It's we've talked about in the past. It's this massive melting pot of philosophical knowledge and this path of enlightenment or higher states of consciousness. The person's really applying the degrees or applying the teachings from the first and the second degree. You know, a lot of these topics we're going to talk about is going to go over a lot of people's heads. But to digress, like the first degree we talked about, if you haven't had a chance, we highly recommend that you go back.
So we talked about the Entered Apprentice in episode 221, and then we followed that up with episode 225. You and I talked about the Fellowcraft degree.
So episode 221, we talked about, you know, the Entered Apprentice, and I highly recommend going back and listening to that and getting into what we talked about. Or you can always explore in a lot of esoteric books that we've mentioned in that episode as well. And it talks about controlling the discipline of the body, controlling the body, and how that body works. In episode 225, we mentioned Fellowcraft degree. We went into explanation on that. Briefly, we didn't give away much secrets. We talked about and how important it is controlling the mind. But the third focuses on controlling the spirit, the intangible aspect that you really can't see with your eyes and with your senses.
So would you say that, like, to some extent, it's almost the iceberg theory on psychology, that what you see on the top of the surface of the water is just the littlest bit, and the real mass of the object is below the surface, or the psychology is below the surface in regards to the large area under the surface can be thought of as the spirit. It is the underlying larger part of what you are, is this spiritual being that needs to be brought to the surface, or at least lets you discover it.
I think you said it best in a few episodes back that, you know, we're spiritual beings having a human experience.
It's a popular meme of the era, which was that we are not humans with souls. We're souls or spirits that happen to reside in a body. So within this legend of this construct, there is a revered architect. And some would say that the architect and the legend surrounding him does a great job in this art and this play of taking your mind and solidifying the teachings of what they're trying to tell you by, you know, acting this out in a real physical play. Not a table read, but a real play.
You also touched on like the aspects of Hiram, the master builder of King Solomon's temple. And again, we've mentioned many times in the show of the allegory of King Solomon's temple pertaining to the human body. And the degree teaches a lot of Masons on how to guard against breaches of like fidelity. He's also a representation, this character of like truth, determination, and righteousness and spirit for the humankind, or mankind, or the earth. Or it could also be emblematic of a simple idea, things that are presented in the universe that throws that idea or a certain path off. It's more or less like a system of checks and balances, and to make sure that you have that truly embodied into your heart, and whatever that may be that you're going after. And it's presented in this wonderful allegory. But also, you know, this legend that's shrouded in mystery is a very, very similar allegory that's been represented consistently in a lot of esoteric circles. Brother Robert Hurd gets into this in his book.
The Initiatic Experience?
Exactly, thank you. And wonderful read, and he gives a wonderful lecture if you ever get a chance to visit him, or if you're in Colorado. I would recommend seeing one of his degrees in his lodges, or pick up his paper, his magazine.
The Living Stones. Yeah, it's currently the working tools. Since they're on a hiatus, a great magazine to pick up if you already don't subscribe is The Living Stones by Robert Hurd. So speaking of the Initiatic Experience, a lot of the degrees themselves, I mean, Masonry is an initiatic experience. I mean, you're being initiated into something. I find, though, that what initiations typically consist of, there's a set of parameters that have to, in my mind, get checked off for it to be considered an initiation. These checks and that have to be checked off in order for me to consider it an initiatic experience, things have to get, again, a certain way. And I think the third degree meets that criteria and has the most in common. Like if you ever read initiation ceremonies of ancient Greek philosophical schools or Egyptian mystery schools. Now, there's a great book that Frater O and I both enjoy, and in fact, I sent it out to a listener not too long ago. It was called The Lost Keys of Freemasonry, and it actually starts off, it's by Manly P. Hall, it starts off as a young man is being pulled out of a crypt in Egypt, like he's being pulled out of a sarcophagus, and then he's led to some stairs, and he meets demons that like fall in his face and everything, and by the end of the book he comes out on top of this pyramid and he sees the rising sun in the morning. Then they anoint him as this Egyptian priest. Now to me, that's an initiation in the fullest sense of the word. I mean, you have some symbolic acts, you have some obstacles and fears and things you have to confront. Now, that's an initiation, and I think the third degree is nothing like the Lost Keys of Freemasonry, but the Lost Keys of Freemasonry describes an initiation, and I think that the book does a great job of describing of what an initiation is and exactly what flavor your initiation is going to be in the Masonic Lodge is going to be much different and nothing like what's in Lost Keys of Freemasonry again. However, it does a great job of giving you what to expect in a way. But going away from talking about, Frater O and I have talked about this, and there is a lot of things that we just can't say, and even everything we're saying right now, like he and I are constantly checking each other, like, oh, can we even say that? And yeah, we can. There's nothing wrong with what we're telling you. However, this is incredibly difficult, and I hope you guys do appreciate it because, boy, brains are storming.
We mentioned that before in the kind of the green room before we jumped on, how careful we should be. And you mentioned a few people, allegories, and I wanted to touch on that, like the allegory of Osiris and Isis, an Egyptian. You mentioned the allegory of Dionysus, the Greek god. Same thing with Krishna and Hindu allegories, and story of Odin and that allegory, and as well as if you get into like mystical Christianity, Christ. It's like this whole. I'm only going to mention them. I'm not going to mention why it's significant. But the third degree parallels a lot of those stories.
It's really kind of interesting, right, though? Because from the beginning, we tell men in a way that Masonry is a system of morality illustrated by a system of morality.
In allegory and illustrated by its symbols.
Yeah, say it one more time for me.
It's veiled in allegory and illustrated by its symbols.
Veiled in allegory, illustrated by symbols. The symbols play a part in every degree. Every one of them. The allegory kind of does. The allegory is really reserved for the second and third degree, and it's a very interesting story. I feel, though, that it should be noted that so many people, they come out of a third degree and nobody ever bothers to tell them, and maybe they're not readers, they didn't read the texts or anything else, but it is important to realize that the third degree, it was written in around the 1717 Grand Lodge era. The first ever evidence of a third degree, as we know it, taking place, happened around 1725, mid-1720s. For that, you were just an honored fellowcraft, and they gave you a similar degree. We talked about this in a previous episode with the matchstick and things like that. And just so that everybody knows that, again, this is not historical fact. This is an allegory. And you need to remember these are allegories where it is a story with a hidden meaning many levels deep.
For the candidate, too. That's strictly it.
Yes.
The person that's for is the candidate only.
Yeah, so it is for the candidate and the candidate only. This is why we take degree work so seriously in the Masonic fraternity. And when taken seriously, it does profound things. It is a recipe, if you will, for being put on the path. And at that point, as Frater O has said in the past, it's up to you to walk the walk, not just talk it.
Yeah, there's a lot of symbols that are represented, in that lecture. Beautiful after you kind of go through that play, and a lot of it's unfolded. And for me personally, it took a handful of times going back and listening to that lecture and going, wow, that was there.
Right, yeah, so many symbols that are explained to you. It's almost, if you do a rudimentary search, say on Amazon, you might come across it if you can. Emblem books. Emblem books were very interesting part of our history, world history, because emblems, as we all know, speak volumes rather than words that convey 1, 2, 3, 4 meanings. A symbol holds much more. Symbols and emblems, there are so many in Freemasonry, and the culmination of your third degree, when you're explained symbols, you kind of feel like, finally, somebody told me what that meant. Frater O, what do you think about, like I said, we can't necessarily go into what the third degree is about, but what can we talk about? And one of those things was a little bit of the philosophical, a little bit of the mystical. What are some interesting points that we can talk about philosophically and also within the realm of mystic?
If you don't mind, I'm going to digress and take the readers back to the first degree. We talked about the purification process of purifying, the body, purifying, the aspect. And in alchemical processes, that was usually the first step. Same thing with if you get into shamanistic centers and processes, it's all about purifying the body before any mystical religious ceremony. And when I say shamanism, that could be spoken about on all different planes, from Tibetan, South American, Latin American, even here in North America, shamanistic centers, and really purifying the body of diet and nutrition. And it's interesting, if you get into shamanism in particular, before any psychedelic ritual, regardless if it's peyote or if it's psilocybin mushrooms or ibogaine or ayahuasca, they always talk about the strict diet to adhere to before the actual ritual. And the majority of those diets consist of these simple ideas or things. And it's diet-wise, it's no salt, no sugar, no animal protein whatsoever. And usually you have to stay away from fatty foods. Really, and no processed foods or chemicals. So a very strict, pure diet. Again, in alchemical aspects, and if you look into mystical aspects, they believe that everything is consciousness. So regardless if it's an animal consciousness that you consume, you're consuming the ego of that animal, and you're embodying the spirit of that creature as well. When you start getting into plants, it's the same thing, and then that's when you get into mushrooms. And then there's another whole tangent I can go on to about alcohol and all kinds of other aspects. But digressing back, it's a purification of the body. Also interesting to talk about too is before any psychedelic ritual or any kundalini or mystical state that a lot of these mystical schools get into, regardless if it's in-depth Rosicrucianism or if it's even more Sufism or any mystical area, is that no partaking in sex whatsoever. To digress just a second here on sexual energy, it's been referred to as tantric energy, in Hinduism, or William Reich, who's been written about extensively, he called it Oregon energy, which was his exact words for orgasm energy, and how important conserving that energy is, because that is the beginning of where the life force comes from, and how important it is to conserve that energy. A lot of the conspiracy theorists love to look at Eyes Wide Shut as a crazy satanic worship ritual, that wonderful movie by Stanley Kubrick, and that's furthest from the truth. It's people standing around and being more or less vampires and not partaking in the ritual. This has been written about in a lot of like Crowley's work, and if you get into like deep esoteric, like left-handed path kind of stuff, of being around orgies and these sexual ceremonies and not partaking in them and absorbing the sexual energy to recharge your chakra centers or recharge your own centers. Interesting to note too about William Reich. He's been written about extensively and how he could cure cancer, and he figured out how to electronically control these energies and transfer them in machines into humans. Really, really powerful stuff. If you start getting the study of tantric, it's really, really powerful. If you look at a lot of fundamental principles of any religious dogmatic system or mystical system, it's always about seeking abstinence and not partaking in sex, and the holy seed or what it may be is just conserving that energy. So getting back to the controlling the human body, I mean, for men, that's like a very animalistic trait. The body in the reptilian brain is very animalistic, and learning how to control that is really important. That's just it's a process for most spiritually adept people.
Well, that goes back to, your virtues, controlling that animal brain, controlling that reptilian side of your brain that's going to say, I need to do this. I need to do that. And when you take that step back, you look at it and you say, no, I don't. This is a want, an urge of that evolutionary pull toward instinctual survival built into flesh machine that you are. It all boils down to this instinctual survival mechanism, whether that goes as far as sex, for procreational purposes, or whether you have a vice like alcoholism or drugs, or for some people sex. It's an addiction, and that's one of those things we talk about, getting rid of your vices, your superfluities, because these are all distractions, primarily are taking you away from that ultimate path, which should be up the mountain and, trying not to look left or right at the shiny keys and the football games and the Kardashians and any other of these odd distractions on your way. And sure, we always say that we have these guilty pleasures, and to have one or two is probably an okay thing. But again, we're not saying you have to go totally abstinent, you have to do this and you have to do that. We're simply exploring the ideas that are written about very extensively throughout occult schools and mystical writings. And again, when I say occult, I simply mean hidden knowledge. We're not talking about Satan worship or anything, but very, very interesting stuff.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, people that want to go, there's that left-handed path aspect that some people can dig into, and the Lesser Keys of Solomon has been written about and talked about on how each demon is just a simple construct of the human mind, and if you don't keep it in check, it will grab hold, and it'll start to control you.
So let me ask you this. Now we're going to get some deep stuff here for our listeners. The Hiramic legend. Hiram is this great builder. Yet in the Keys of Solomon, the temple is built by demons controlled by the seal of Solomon, which is the star of David, on his ring. And Solomon was not this great dude. Later in his years, he had so many wives that he even took wives of other countries who worshipped other gods. This was forbidden. His council came to him and told him, look, you can't do this, man. You cannot maintain these relationships with so many women and yada, yada, yada. And Solomon deemed this all very necessary because he was trying to maintain relationships with the kings and rulers and the lands all around, trying to keep the peace, right? And but we go back and we think, how did he build this temple? And when we think about the demons that he controlled in these books, right, it talks about Enochian magic and things of this nature where he's supposed to control the demons, and this is how he builds Solomon's temple. And in the Lost Keys of Solomon, where we're talking about these demons that possibly represent aspects of human nature or human mind or consciousness, now we have this parallel, and we call this magnificent builder Hiram, but then in a parallel story we've got demons that are building the temple. So what are we saying? Is there a parallel between, are we saying that all these demons together come up and make this great consciousness that when controlled by something like the Solomonic seal, which could represent any number of great aspects of a controlled mind, is what controlled the demons, or is what put the designs on the trestle board for the builder to erect this magnificent structure as Solomon's temple, or as allegorically represented by the human body?
Either you can, there's always people talking about on how, the demons have got the best of that person. or I can't control a demon. The demons are aspects of your internal. They're part of yourself and your psyche. They're not external by any means. And if you control them, maybe you're in control of yourself, right?
Exactly. And if you're in control of yourself, you're controlling your building. You're constructing the good person you are. We say we're making good men better. Okay, so now we're coming full circle and talking about how we're doing that and just what that might lead to in ways for you to understand and make these parallels to say, King Solomon's temple is me. And this, maybe the Solomonic symbol, the Star of David, represents these forces that I'm supposed to use to control my demons. So there are, and I'm not saying this is definitive, I'm saying this is stuff that's written about, it's probable, it works, it's part of the allegory, and it's deep in the onion.
Oh, absolutely. And these are our own personal opinions, too, that we've taken back through our research and through our introspection and through our ego. And, we talked about kind of the purification aspect. And then the second step is controlling the mind, right? And it's about the whole aspect of illumination. So let's stop and let's talk about illumination. What is illumination to you?
Well, to me, illumination, obviously, before I thought about Masonic philosophy in general, illumination simply meant a good grasp or understanding of how something works that most people don't. To be illuminated suggests to me that among the masses, it is brighter than. In a field of candles, one is illuminated. Something of that nature. So to me, that's what it meant in the beginning. As a master mason now and a member of several other organizations where we receive quote-unquote further light, illumination is I would say, it's the point where or you've looked, you've listened, you've studied, but to be illuminated, in my mind, is to actually use what you're being taught and to have it in practice to a point where others would come to you then and say, how do you do this? Or people will regard you as, we have all over in Eastern philosophical schools, you've got, yogis, you have heads of religious orders, and these people are illuminated because they know, I would say they know what they're talking about. These people usually don't do a whole lot of talking. They will lead you to where you have to go without ever telling you.
Those are the best teachers.
How about for you? What is illumination to Frater O?
This is a pretty deep question, so I'm going to go off on the deep end. And this is my personal experience, but this is going to kind of go back and forth to the first degree and then build from the first degree up to the second degree in my experience. And so if we look at Eastern medicine, we look at, philosophical schools and the whole idea of enlightenment, right? We can both agree that, Masonry is this system of the path of the science of enlightenment. And when I say science, it's not like Western science, it's this school. And the body produces light. They can actually measure that. Joe Rogan, when on one of his episodes on the Sci-Fi Channel, I forget the name of the show off the top of my head, he was able to measure light with this person at this university. And they were able to measure Taoist masters, and they were able to produce all this light out of their body. They would be put in a dark room, and they had this really deep camera, and they can, measure light. As well as there's a German individual, I forget the name off the top of my head. He has a special kind of camera where you can photograph light and auras and energy. And so if we look at the human body in general, we can read about it how things in the past will weigh you down. And there's so much more to the human body and the human brain that's been written about in Eastern medicine, and it's been written about in esoteric texts, and how there's a simple quote that I've read along the lines from the Lao Tzu, and I know that's a religion, but he who lives in the past is depressed. He who lives in the future suffers from anxiety, but the power is living in the now. And if we start looking at the polarity of the human body and of being a negative and positive and looking at that as the past and the future, right hand and left hand, as well as the hemispheres of the brain continues on polarity throughout the whole body. People can talk about, well, if you're usually right-handed, more than likely you're right-brained, and and vice versa for left hand. That's not true for all cases, but that's been written. And so if you get into these things, you realize that a lot of times if you're holding on to the past, it physically resides itself in the muscle tissue and it weighs you down. Or a situation that you've wronged someone in the past, it might be in your subconscious, and you might be able to lock that behind just some doors and deep down into your psyche, but that physically starts to manifest on a cellular level inside the muscle tissue. And that sometimes can, as well as the muscle tissue, can relate to glandular system, mainly pertaining to the endocrine system, where a lot of cancers are found. And through my path and through my my introspection, I found that when I'd go into meditation and I would deal with the situation, every time when I go into meditation, I would be confronted with something I did, how I wronged someone in the past, or a situation that I've been holding on to mentally, or someone else wronged me, and how to let go of that. This kind of gets into Jungian, very, Carl Jung psychology, and being able to let go of that. When you start to create that purification process, and you start letting go, you become lighter, right? You start letting go of those things. The simple allegory of the weighing of the heart ceremony, written about in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, we touched on in the Entered Apprentice episode. And again, all your actions are encoded on the heart, good or bad, and the bad actions weighed down the heart. Again, we're getting back down to the whole idea of enlightenment, becoming lighter and better. And it's the same aspect of when you're around a really positive person. Like they're just like, their energy just rubs off on you. You're just like, wow, that's intoxicating. That person's so great. But at the same aspect, when you're around a negative person, you can tell by their posture. Like they're usually hunched over, right? They're holding on to things. You can just tell by their body language. And then when you're around them, they spew out all kinds of negativity, and that rubs off on you too. So digressing all the way back to the purification process for me is just being able to let go of the things in the past and allow myself not to live in the future, not to live in the past, but to live in the now and to be centered. But that can pertain to when you get into Hatha yoga, the Ha and the Tha is the sun and the moon, or the yin and the yang, or the positive and negative, balancing those hemispheres and balancing the body, and how important that is, and really like centering yourself. So for me, I know it's pretty deep and that's long-winded. My apologies, but that's what enlightenment is for me.
Not at all. You talked about Hatha yoga, and what's interesting about that to me is that it's kind of sun, moon, master the lodge. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting you point on that. I want to touch on that. For all the Masons listening, or non-Masons that plan on becoming, check out the opening and the closing of each lodge.
Yeah. Opening and closing ceremony is arguably one of the most interesting ceremonies of everything we do. I mean, degrees are wonderful and everything, but if you pay attention to the opening and closing and you ask yourself why these things are this way, and you start thinking about what certain things represent and what's happening with them as people are moving about the lodge, you start to understand a deeper fundamental truth about what you're actually doing and what it symbolically represents when you're opening a lodge and when you're closing the lodge.
The third step is perfection. And on this path to perfection, you've been in these 2 degrees leading up to this, you presented working tools and how to work on your ashlar, so to speak, and how we mentioned the 2nd degree, and how you hue and square all your actions, and so your brick or your ashlar can fit into the wall of consciousness of mankind. And it presents in the 3rd degree some great working tools and how that applies to that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a part of the idea of perfection is parallel to perfection, completion, and becoming part of the one. And what is interesting is we have the symbolism in Masonry. Many times you might see it on Masonic motorcycle riders, or some people prefer on their lapel pins. And I even wrote about this on the Midnight Freemasons, was the skull and crossbones in Freemasonry. And as a very intense symbol of the finality of life. And what is so interesting to me is that the perfection would then equal the completion or the finality of life, becoming, I guess, part of the wall, part of the superstructure, or part of the one. And that idea is found in several works, but it helped me understand a little bit deeper into that symbolism. There's a Latin saying that goes around that skull sometimes, and it means what virtue has brought together, death will not separate. So virtue is brought together, right? All Freemasons, we all had that same virtue where we walked up to the door of the lodge and we knocked. So what virtue has brought together, death will not separate.
Yeah, if you get into a lot of the Illuminati books, and granted it has nothing to do with Freemasonry, it's another path of enlightenment, but there's a really great image that's emblematic of showing 4 skulls. And the translation usually around that skull is, who was the fool, who was the wise man, who was the beggar, and who was the king? Rich or poor, equal in death. So it's just a reminder of that, we all are going to die at one point in time. It escapes no one. We take it for granted that we wake up in this body and we go about and we relive 24 hours every single day. But you never know when your time's up. I mean, it could be tomorrow. Anything can happen. You could lose your best friend tomorrow. So ultimately, the idea of purification is like just to live your life every single day to the best you possibly can, every single moment, and have no regrets and always live in the now.
I was just going to say that leads right back to what you said, live right now. Living in the past, you talked about the idea of that really affecting you physically, and it does. As somebody who suffered from depression and anxiety, my anxiety came from looking at the future like, am I going to have an anxiety attack? And my depression came from thinking about how I felt when I had an anxiety attack. And it was a endless train. And while I wouldn't recommend just pushing something out, but it wasn't until I confronted myself through meditations that I learned to let go of the what ifs, which would pertain to the future. What if I do this? What if this happens? And to let go of the what ifs, and then to not care about the past, because it's the past, it's done. All I can do is make amends for anything that I did that was, bad toward anybody. And so I try my best to live right now. Anybody will tell you if you have anxiety attacks, the more you think about it, the more it comes on. Mm-hmm. So you're directly affecting it. And it is so important to live now. It is interesting. A friend of mine has a watch, and on the watch underside, it says, the time is now. Just a neat little symbolic watch that he has. It is a Masonic watch, too. Guess what body? So,
going off of what you said, is that you are the architect of your reality. Thoughts, actions, words all become things. So you have to be really careful in controlling that, because when you really start perfecting yourself, you really have an influence on this external world. You have to be really careful of what you're building on internally, because if you don't keep that in check, it does manifest itself here in this, from the internal, from the microcosm to the macrocosm. And that's one of the most important lessons that I learned from Masonry.
Totally would agree with you. And I had a frustrating moment over the last 2 weeks. And if this guy is listening to this show, I would say, I'm not mad at you or anything. This guy is not a brother, but he emailed me to ask me about several items of why is Masonry secret? Why do we keep our secret teachings from everybody? And why do we do this? And why do we do that? And I gave him what I would consider great answers in plain language without being allegorical. And he kept coming back. Well, so you're saying this? No, I already told you what I'm telling you. I have told you straight up. That was not anything. And that's the way Frater O and I are talking to you now, is that it's not allegorical when we tell you bad thoughts and emotions turn physical. That's not allegorical. It's real. So for what it's worth, when I say it's real, I should preface that by saying, in our experience, but I've seen it time and time again, and anybody who has suffered through anxiety or depression, two things that are very prevalent in people today, will tell you that it's like a snowball. And if you let it, it will roll downhill and get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until it hits a house. It's just something that you need to control. And that ultimately, we say that it's a system of morality veiled in allegory illustrated by symbols. The morality part is how to act, how to be. In the 1998 Illinois Intender Program book, on the second page, there's a quote, and the quote ends with, Freemasonry is a way of life. So it is not something that you take willy-nilly and you never go back, okay? It's something that you take seriously, and you do. This is not a networking society. Even though we do network, we make good men better, assuming those men do the work.
There's greatness inside of everyone. The question is, are you willing to unlock it?
There you go. So with those wise words from Frater O, we're going to wrap it up for this week. We went all over the place. Again, I'm sure we could rap for hours to come if we had the ability to just say whatever we wanted. However, we are bound by our Masonic obligations, and we have those obligations to our Masonic fraternity, and they come first and foremost. I'm sure you all understand, and if we ever get the opportunity to sit down and have a beer or a Coke or whatever, have a sandwich or eat some food or something with you, and you guys just want to chit-chat about this kind of stuff, it's on. If you're a Master Mason, you're good to go. We can talk all night long. This is bread and butter for Frater O myself, so thank you so much for coming on the show again, Frater O.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, you are a part of the show. So we'll talk to you probably in a couple weeks.
Adios.
All right, I hope you enjoyed the interview. Again, we didn't discuss anything that is secret, in quotes. I hope we enlightened you to quite a bit of fascinating details, things you may not have thought about before, and I hope if we brought up things you had thought about before that we reaffirmed or gave you that affirmation that you are correct in your assumptions about some of the symbolism and some of the things that we are talking about in these interviews. Frater O and I will be talking about something really, really cool in the next episode, which I hope everybody tunes in for. It'll be a really fun interview as well as deeply esoteric on symbolism. We are going to reveal that topic very shortly. Probably won't be the next episode, so you can be looking for that as probably episode 229. Episode 229 of this program is going to be very special. We'll announce that topic very soon. I'll have Frater O release the details on his page, so if you go to Facebook and you check out Frater O, click like, and you will be the first people to know about the new special topic coming out in episode 229. Again, very fun topic. I think you guys will definitely all enjoy. As for the bills, I just have to say, please go over to wcypodcast.com and click on support the show and click through our links there for On It Labs and check out some things, very special things to me, which I love. Alpha Brain. They just came out with Alpha Brain Instant, which is a really good mix that you can put in just 8 ounces of water and chug that real quick and you're good for the whole day. Alpha Brain is a really neat thing. It's a nootropic vitamin, which basically means it's vitamins for your brain. Key vitamins that your brain uses through cognitive functions. So I think it helps me out tremendously. It also has some interesting side effects, which is I wake up without grogginess. It's really pretty neat. So check that out if you can. Go through our links. Use the promo code WCY at checkout. You'll get 10% off, and you'll also be help supporting this show by a small portion of your purchase goes right back to this show. Nothing is marked up on their website. It's just the normal price you would typically get by going to their website. Only you're supporting the show and getting 10% off by using that coupon. Secondly, please consider getting a lapel pin of the Whence variety. Those are available on the limited edition shop. We've got those. We've got some money clips, tie bars, cufflinks. The money clips, tie bars, and cufflinks come in a very limited supply, so I believe we have under 15 of each of those left. And lastly, consider a donation through PayPal, just a direct donation to the show. If you donate $10 or more, you're going to get a lapel pin anyway, so check that out. And whether you donate, again, $1 or 50 cents, it all goes into helping this show stay on the air. We have no premium section, so a lot of podcasts generate revenue by putting out the latest 5 to 10 episodes for free on iTunes, but the backlog of episodes is something you need to pay for. And that's fine. Those shows might really need to do that because supporting and providing a podcast is not an inexpensive endeavor. It costs a good amount of money and a great deal of time. So nothing wrong with that, but this show doesn't do that. All the episodes are available to you 100% free every single day and aren't going anywhere. I have no plans to ever make a premium section. So with that, please consider helping us out with a donation in the way of either shopping on it or checking out a lapel pin or doing a direct donation. It's very much appreciated. We have many thanks to several people who consistently donate. We have Stephen Quisenberry. We've got Steve Harrison. We had Wayne Greenlee. We've got several guys. So if I didn't mention your name, just know that you have received thanks, and we have you on the donor wall on the website. Just fantastic support, and I thank you all for that. This week, we are not going to have a famous Freemason. I have to wrap early. We had a little bit of a holiday weekend this weekend with the family. We went to an indoor water park. We had a lot of fun. So with that, I hope you guys are okay with the this week not having the famous Freemason, but we do need to wrap, and we need to get this done and out to you on time. So because of that, we're going to forego it this week, but it will be back next week. To quote Zimmerman, I guarantee it. With that, I hope you guys all have a great week. Please don't forget to check out the Midnight Freemasons Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Don't forget about the Masonic Roundtable going live at 9 Central every Tuesday evening. We're going up with Faith, Hope, and Charity in a serial episode. So this upcoming week, we're going to be talking about faith. After that, hope, and after that, charity. Topical discussions. We had a great episode last week. We had racism in the craft. We did it respectfully, had an amazing panel of guests, and I hope you all enjoyed that episode. That's on iTunes, it's on Stitcher, it's on YouTube. Just like this show. Pretty cool stuff. So, until next week, stay on the level. For Whence Came You, I'm Robert Johnson.